So it turns out people pleasing is quite the common survival pattern. And I had a number of people reach out to me to be on this Get Curious episode where we're exploring our patterns around people pleasing. So I've decided to do two episodes of Get Curious about your people pleasing pattern. So this is part one of two. I have four lovely human beings join me: Dre, Karina, Dede, and Paula. And what was really fun about this episode is how differently they all people pleased. So I encourage you to listen along and see where it is that you can relate to each of them, see what it is you can uncover about your own survival patterns that revolve around people pleasing, and see where your own explorations take you. If you need some extra support, be sure to download the experiential guide. It's in the show notes, it's on my website, and see what it's like to implement the principles of pausing and noticing your experiences, deepening your awareness of what's happening, and bringing curiosity into what's at the core of these patterns to recognize what else is also possible, while also recognizing when you're trying to fix things, when you're caught in always directing yourself and coming from a top-down approach, how can you start to weave in more bottom-up explorations, recognizing that there isn't anything to fix. You're already whole. And the more that you pan out and recognize that you're a whole sovereign being while also having complex and many patterns involved in being a human, that the more you show up from that place of wholeness to explore the ways you are stuck in survival, the easier the explorations become and the easier things start to shift and transform. So, download the experiential guide, listen along, see where it all takes you, and stay tuned for episode two, where I'll bring on a few more people pleasers and you can hear even more different perspectives on how it is that we can shift out of these people-pleasing patterns that we find ourselves in. Enjoy the episode. So I'm first off excited to have you all here because I actually know all of you. My whole intention with these Get Curious calls is to invite random people on, and with the randomness of people, I don't know their nervous systems as well as I might know some of yours. And not that I know your nervous systems that well, because I do my best because I'm so sensitive to what I notice to not pay attention to what's playing out in the deeper layers of people's human experiences because I'm not invited to. As soon as I'm invited in, it's like, oh, game on. Let's see what do we got going on here? Let's have some fun with this. So I'm really excited to have the four of you here. And what I'm noticing in that is I'm feeling myself leaning forward and wanting to connect with you all. My face is smiling a fair amount in the level of the excitement. I'm also aware of like there's a really sick RV outside my window that's very similar to mine, but it looks like they've done some really incredible work on it. And I'm like, keep my eyes keep getting drawn to it. I'm like, oh, what is that? Ooh, what's that? They've got this big bubble dome on top. I'm like, ooh, what's that? So in this moment, that's what I'm noticing. And I just want to invite all of us here on the call, as well as everyone who's listening, to also just pause and notice what it is you're experiencing. So I'll invite my amazing four guests here that are willing to explore with me today in this Get Curious episode to share, yeah, names, where you're from, and anything in this moment that you're aware of. Pauses can be edited out, so we can have long pauses all we want.
I can go first, I guess. Um, my name is Dre, and I live in BC. And yeah, I feel like a nice hum of anticipation about this call, which is lovely. And up until recently, I've been feeling quite freeze stuck, and so it's really nice to be, yeah, just having an open conversation about nervous system things, and yeah.
About the human experience.
Mhm.
This is once you start having these conversations, it gets harder to have the mundane surface level conversations. Thanks, Dre.
Well, I can go next. The Tofino duo here. My name is Dede. I'm sitting on the call from Tofino, British Columbia. Just came back from walking Chesterman's Beach. In this moment, I feel slightly overwhelmed, physically tired, mentally tired, and also grateful for many things. And so I'm curious in seeing how this conversation unfolds. Thank you for having
Mhm. Thanks, Dee. If you're open to it, can you describe how you know you're overwhelmed? Because I find that's something I like to do when we notice, like, I'm excited. How did I know I was excited? Right? For me, there's this leaning forward, a smile on my face. Um, I didn't name it, but there's a little increase in my heartbeat. Anything you want to name around how you notice you're overwhelmed?
Sure. So for me today, it presents as heartbeat feels faster and headache. Lots of mental stuff has happened today for me, and yeah, in my heart center and brain, I suppose, is where I feel that in my body.
And a busyness there.
Yeah, and I could see myself holding my head earlier. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
great. Good
mhm,
catch. Thanks, Dee.
mhm.
I can go. I'm Paula. I'm from Spain. I live in Bali right now, and yeah, I've had an accident recently, and I'm in the middle of a long recovery process, so I'm feeling all sorts of emotions and all sorts of things in my body. But then also the minute that I switch the screen off and I see Unical, because we worked together before, it's like everything kind of calms down and soothes, and which is really nice.
Nice.
Mm.
Awesome. Thanks, Paula.
And I'm Karina. I live on Galiano Island in British Columbia. I'm feeling super nervous. I hate Zoom calls. I can really feel it in my heart. I'm here though because I'm feeling stuck in patterns that I would like to try to shift. I think my people pleasing has started to affect my work, and I don't want that.
Mm, yeah. Do you want to feed us into kind of sharing a little bit about your people-pleasing patterns? Like, how do you catch yourself people-pleasing? How is it impacting your work? And we'll just all go around and share a little bit of that.
I'm feeling like I care way too much. It's always about the other person, not about me. Yeah, get super stressed because I just want everything to be perfect. I want everyone to be happy, and it's not possible to be perfect. Then I go into overwhelm, and yeah, it's not helpful.
So you're aware, especially at work, but this wanting everything to be perfect, wanting everyone else to be happy, and the toll is it creates a lot of stress on your system and creates a lot of overwhelm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you want it to be different.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Karina.
I can continue on that thread of wanting the perfectionism thing is definitely part of it, but there's this element that I think is interesting that I feel like really uncomfortable with negative feedback, like not professionally, but like when you go out for dinner and someone's like, that place was really terrible. I'm like, oh my God. It's like
Don't
I
give negative feedback.
physically can't. Like it makes me super uncomfortable when people express negative opinions, even when they don't relate to me at all. When someone's like, oh, I didn't like that. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I feel super, yeah, like always being kind of aware and trying to keep things like smooth sailing, which is definitely the way that I would say people pleasing comes up for me. But then there's an interesting element where I don't, like in work settings, for example, when I feel like I'm being overloaded or like, you know, asked something unreasonable, I have absolutely no problem being like, nah, I can't do that for you today. So like I'm like almost happy to be like, ducks. But yeah, when it comes to like people expressing, like negative opinions.
I like it. So these negative opinions, and then also in the social circles, trying to keep everything smooth, maybe the family dynamics, friend dynamics, things like that. It's not so much at work, but
Yeah.
this real, yeah.
Yeah, like
It might show up at work, but if someone asks you to do something, that's when the boundaries are like, no, I have the right to say no. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I like it. Awesome. Thanks, Trey.
It's funny how it presents a little bit differently for everyone, because for me, I'm not a perfectionist in any way, like at all. And it's the way my people pleasing manifests is since I was like the youngest I can remember, I always felt responsible for everyone around me, not everyone around me, everyone in the whole world being happy, and like every single problem there is, and solving everything. And which is a lot, and which is something that you can't do it as a child. So it's not so much that I have to be perfect, is that if someone else is sad, it's my fault because I'm not enough, or I can't do enough for them. Which is really crippling. And the worst thing is, I remember working with you, Nicole, that I because I just always thought I'm a nice person because I care so much. And that's just my personality. I'm lovely. And it was a little bit was eye-opening, and also a little bit kind of devastating to find out. I mean, yeah, it's your personality, it's also a trick, like just patterns and it's triggers, and it's not necessarily healthy. So then I did have a moment of thinking, like, who am I if I take this away? Because this is my whole personality, like caring about absolutely every single conflict in the world, every single person, everything around me so much.
Love it. That's a lot of work too, hey?
Yeah.
A lot to hold.
Mm.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Paula.
I want to come back to Dre's comment because I'm like that person at the restaurant that'd be like, no, that's just no. But I want to look at through a lens of that I care so much, like I give so much fuck in my life, that if, like, for instance, last week I was in a very beautiful rated 5-star restaurant in Qualicum Beach. I was really excited about this whole experience, anticipated it over and over. And yeah, I was sort of like, no, I would have been like your worst date. In a condescending way, like just simply like, and then I had, just simply like, well, that's kind of not good enough. Like, and not even in a judgmental way, just in a way where I had invested a lot of time in researching this place. That was my thoughts. I was so excited. The reviews were so good. It was date night with my husband, and then I had to look at myself because, like, in reality, it was like really good. But what was it that made me was like, no, that's just not gonna cut it on that very evening. And there was many layers within myself that was going on that evening, and truly probably not much to do with the experience itself. And how, for me, when I do something, I care so deeply, and I do it with like the core of my being, that when it's not reciprocal, it was just like, so yeah, we should probably not go out together.
It might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting anyhow. Yeah.
So Dede, there's this like you care so much, you put so much effort into making things perfect or wanting things to be to the highest standard possible. So when you go somewhere and expect that and it's not met, that's when the disappointment and the frustration and the anger arises, right? It's like, is that what I'm hearing? Is you put so much care in, so when it's not put into what you're receiving,
Right.
that's when yeah, things get
Yeah.
spoken to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't necessarily share that with the people over there because they were lovely. And the intention wasn't for anybody to feel my big feelings around the experience, but it was a curious thing for me to be sitting there and just kind of like having multiple layers of experience around just a regular dinner, really. Like, yeah.
Isn't it so fun when we get to pause and notice our experiences?
Yeah.
This
And
is again,
my husband he's probably more like Dre being like, please don't let her just share what she has on her mind yet again. Yeah. Yeah.
And my guess is the more you put in to wanting things to be perfect and, really wanting other people to have a good time or, go 100%, the more frustrated and the more you want to speak out when someone else hasn't.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then me a little link the next day. How was your experience? And like, and
You
the
want
like,
to really hear?
and so I didn't. I just like put the stars as they were asking, and essentially I was like, well, surely they're gonna like ask why like this specific star was like 3 and not 5, and then they didn't, and interesting sort of, yeah. Anyway,
There's a good pattern that unfolds there for you
yeah,
to
yeah,
explore. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So
Period.
what I want to invite people listening to inquire into is the same thing. Like what is your pattern around people pleasing? Because we just heard 4 examples that are, there's some similarities, but there's also a lot of differences in how we all people please. I know for me, I only recently really discovered that I people please. I was like, yeah, but my people pleasing comes in the easygoingness of like I'll do whatever. Like I'm so easygoing and nothing bothers me. It's fine. Like, that's my version of people pleasing that I didn't even know was people pleasing because I thought it was just me being pretty casual and pretty easygoing. And the more I'm realizing that layer, the more I'm like, oh, right. The more I have an opinion or the more that I have needs and wants, then I actually have to be in conflict and that's a whole nother ball game in itself. So there's a whole nother people pleasing piece that we can dive into. So what I want to invite us to do next is like I see all of our patterns as a way we shift into this way of being in the world, right? So it's not like we're this quality of people pleasing all the time, whatever our patterns are. We shift into it depending on the environment. Depending on what's going on, we know when this part of us is needed, and then we shift into it. Right? For some of you, you may live in that a fair amount of the time, but sometimes it's louder. Sometimes it's just like Karina said, right? Like, who am I if I'm not this, right? So it starts to become an even more of a interesting, entangled journey into like, oh, what happens if I'm not this pattern? But what I'd love to do next is like inquire into how we know we're in the pattern. And this is where I like to bring in the awareness of our human experience, because the more we can sense we're entering into the pattern, the more we realize that something in our environment has sent off the alarm bells to indicate there's some sort of perceived threat and some sort of reason why I should move into my people-pleasing mad skills that I have, right? So we're going to inquire into like how do you know you're in that state, or how do you experience yourself in that state? So for me, like when I even described I'm easygoing, I'm fine, right? I feel this like fluidity, I feel this airiness. It feels really casual and like my face lights up a little, but I feel disconnected from my body, right? I kind of feel like a little bit of a void below me, but I feel this like, yeah, my hands want to flow around, right? I'm just like, whatever, it's no big deal. Uh, whatever. Yeah. So that's how I'm noticing myself in that. There's this kind of floatiness and airiness, a disconnect from my body slightly. And as I'm pausing and noticing it, it's starting to change. So I won't go into that, but I'll get the four of you to describe a little bit and just pick one of your patterns. You know, we all named like little flavors. So if you want to stick to what you shared, if you want to bring in something else, you can.
Yeah, for me, because you say that what makes you switch on, for me, it's being around people. So it's literally like they don't have to do anything. I just have to, they have to be human and close. Or on Zoom, I notice myself, and because I posed and noticed before, like I notice when I'm on Zoom with other people and we have the cameras on, I'm always aware of when someone's talking, what is my face doing? Am I being supportive, and is it visible? So am I smiling for them? And it's not, which is really distracting. It's not about my experience, which I guess is how I notice that I'm in that mode, which is always that it's less about my experience. It's about how other people are experiencing me.
So when you're not around people, you're something different.
Yes, I just feel a lot more relaxed, and it's like, yeah, in my body, and yeah, everything is a lot calmer. I'm living my own experience. I'm feeling everything that I'm feeling. When I'm with other people, I tend to be feeling what they are feeling. If that makes sense.
So yeah, totally. And what I am aware of in that is the shift, the quick shift that happens. And I want to point that out in case anyone else can relate. It's like when you're on your own, you feel like you can just be yourself. You can be with your own experiences. You have this sense of spaciousness, this sense of self. And then as soon as someone else is in the room, or as soon as you enter the Zoom call, it's just like whoop, quickly into the other thing where there's some hypervigilance, some awareness of like, how is everyone else responding to me? How do I have to look? So there's a change in, you know, how you're smiling, how you're behaving. Probably also worrying about what you're going to say. That can probably show up, I'm guessing, right? So there's this kind of like shift you make into not only picking up on what everyone else is feeling, but also adapting how you need to be relative to how everyone's feeling in the room or how you're perceiving them to be feeling.
Exactly that. And even something as simple as texting or being on a phone call, like they don't even have, or having someone in the same house, I'm aware of by making noise or things like that.
Yeah.
And it is a shift, and I get a lot more tension.
Yeah. So I want to just invite, can anyone else relate to this that's on the call? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Big time.
Okay. So what I want to do is I want to just pause with this for us to explore just slightly, because this whole sense of like, what are we experiencing? There's some really obvious things we can pick up on, and then there's some more subtler things we can pick up on. So I want to pause to invite us to be aware of the physiology. So the physiology meaning this change we make from being more connected, feeling safe, to like, whoop, something's dangerous, and all of a sudden my physiology changes. So, and feel free, any of you, to pipe in here when you notice that shift, like, okay, I'm by myself versus, oh, I'm texting, or I'm on a phone call, or I step into a Zoom call, or someone comes over, or someone's just in the house, or I'm with a group of people, whatever it is. What happens in your body that really shows you that you're in this different state?
Sweating.
Flooding?
Sweating.
Sweating. Yeah, good one. Yeah. Yeah. So the sweat comes dripping in. Yeah.
I agree with that. And I also feel a rigidity.
Yeah. So spine gets a little more rigid, muscle tone probably becomes a little more tonified, ready. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my shoulders go up, and then my chest kind of tenses as well.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that chest piece. Anyone notice anything in their eyes? This is something I'm often drawn to in people. There's a shift in the eyes that happens. Anyone got anything there?
I think that I would visually show signs in my eyes, but I'm not sure I can. Yeah, there's this, yeah, no, now that you're mentioning it, even in others, just this sort of like haziness or hyper
Mm,
or disconnection versus hyper connection, I suppose.
hmm hmm Cool. So it's kind of like it goes a bit blurry. You kind of are losing focus. There's a little more for those
Mm,
that like the nervous system words, dorsal tone online. Things are kind of shutting down a little.
mhm.
Some people might also notice a hypervigilance where the eyes kind of become a little more alert and then are like looking around a lot more. That's something that we can pick up on too.
I
Cool.
mean, just when you said that, I have, so my jaw gets tense as well, and just when you said about the eyes, I thought about them and everything relaxed. I don't know if it's the eyes or like this, just the face, like all around it. So I am holding some kind of tension there because yeah, the minute I'm conscious of it, it just loosens.
Mm. So something happens, but by bringing attention to it, it softens. Yeah. So, um, this is why I find it so interesting to pay attention to more of the human experience. Because, we can be quite familiar with our patterns, but the more we recognize what's happening at a physiological level and the shifts that our nervous system is making relative to the perceived threat in the room, we get to work with it in a very different way than something that's more top down. I'm aware of my patterns and I'm trying not to do it, or I'm trying to do something different. So that's what we're going to explore a little bit more here is like, how do we understand more of what's happening as the whole human experience? Sometimes we want to direct ourselves and come more top down. Other times we want to explore more like what's actually happening here that we can support to move ourselves through whatever it is we're stuck in this perceived entanglement with humans equal threat, right? I better than people please. All right, so that was Paula's example of how she notices herself, and obviously we've all got some similarities there. Anyone else want to share how you notice yourself shift into your pattern, or what's present or louder when you're in your patterns?
I guess
Gee,
I feel, oh, go ahead, Dede.
no, go ahead.
Um, I guess I feel like a little bit like anxious when I'm either hearing someone share something that's not necessarily positive, or I'm like reading a room and trying to make sure everyone seems content. Where it's kind of like how can I fix it almost, or like if it's too much and someone's already like shared something super negative, then I'm just like full shut down. It's like somewhere between this like anxious, like flighty feeling, which I'm sure people are like, oh, get out of here with that energy. And just fully being like,
Can't do anything now. Shut down.
I'd like to vaporize now.
Yeah. I'm not involved in this party. I don't know
Please
them.
turn me to dust.
Yeah. So what I heard in what you're explaining, Dre, is like the unfolding of the pattern. And I really enjoy looking at how patterns unfold. Um, because it allows us to see kind of the different layers that are involved. So the end result is like, I just want to, fade away and just let me dissolve. Thank you very much. But there's things that happen before that that really are involved in this process of people pleasing. So you expressed to start, there's this someone says something and you move into the anxiousness,
Mhm.
right? How do you notice yourself in the anxiousness? What's that first transition you make?
Like in my body or like the
Anything.
experience.
Yeah. How do you know like
Um,
everything's good and we're having a great time and then something's off?
yeah, I kind of feel like I wonder if it's almost like you can't do that. Like almost like this kind of like caught off guard, like what? Like
Hmm.
how dare you share a negative experience when it's like very fair to share any of your opinions realistically. But I think part of me is like, oh, is this allowed?
Mm.
And so it makes me like feel like a little bit like a second guess. And then I'm kind of like racing thoughts a little bit, almost like looking for an exit, but just being kind of like, oh, maybe we can soften this. Maybe we can make it better. Like, how can we smooth things over? It's like, not even about me a lot of the time.
But need to calm the waters. Thank you. So I think that's a really important piece, that that earlier stage of like, ugh, wait, you're allowed to say something negative? Wait a minute, this is okay? Right? That's where something's entangled, where it's like, it's not okay to express yourself. So that's almost, I don't know if this feels accurate, but like a shock or a startle or confusion, and then into the worrying, the thoughts, how do I fix it? You know, calm the waters as much as you can, and then I can't, so then I'm going to dissolve and just fade away. Thank you very much, right? So it starts with probably, again, feel free to correct me or feel free to pipe in something else, but it probably starts with like a confusion or a startle or like, oh, what? And then it's like that, but wait, that's not okay. And then off we go down the pattern path.
Yeah, like I don't feel like I have a very good poker face, and I feel like there's probably been times where I'm like, oh, like, oh no, like you did that.
Yeah, yeah. But wait, no.
Yeah, but when I think about it, it's often there's, I think, an element of like, I think maybe Paula was talking about this, where it's like everyone else's needs or feelings are kind of taking a hierarchy, and it's like having needs at all is almost like the thing that offends me, because I don't feel like that's appropriate. And so when other people do, I'm like, whoa, what? Like, yo,
don't you know being needy is inappropriate?
You got to cut that out. But
everything's fine. Keep the waters calm.
Yeah, literally everything's fine.
Yeah.
But when I think about it, it's like I remember I had like a landlord one time who was like, you can't have an air conditioner. And this is like in Toronto where it gets hot. And I was like, okay. And I got like a dehumidifier, and she yelled at me on the phone. And she was like, the reason you couldn't have one is because of the power, but like whatever. And I cried, like, and I'm like, this was basically a slumlord. This place was like a hovel. And I have a friend who is a people pleaser in a lot of ways, but she's like, renting a place for 6 months, and she's like, this light fixture has to go, that like ceiling fan is atrocious. And I'm like,
we don't ask for those things.
You're being housed. What are you doing?
Yeah. Don't express your needs. Dede's like, what do you mean? Fight for your needs.
There's a certain level, really. I mean, yeah. I see both sides, I suppose. Yeah, because I'm a people pleaser, and I'm also I guess I would hope to receive the same amount of care that I put out in the world, and it's not always the case, either in my relationship or my relationship with my children or my tenants or so on and so forth, right? There's many layers of like, there are times where it's like, yeah, girl, go out there and express your need big time. And others is like, no, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
It'd be interesting to look at, like, where is it okay to ask for your needs or express that, and when is it okay or when is it not okay, right?
But
like there's probably some layers there.
Yeah, it's kind of never been okay, because it's like it stems from childhood where the needs weren't met, and now as an adult, that's bit people pleasing. It's hard to change that pattern. So there is like,
Instead, because asking for the needs is a lot more challenging from a developmental perspective, needs not being met, you then learned how to meet everyone else's needs the best that they could in hopes that it would be returned. So that's kind of the pattern that developed, right?
I think realizing now that actually, unless you ask about the light fixture or whatever, like those assertive asks, people can't read your mind, and it's just not going to be met unless you have that ability to be assertive in your needs, I suppose. But as a people pleaser, it's all good. Yeah. And then until it's not, and then
the buildup is real.
The buildup is real. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I love that you name name, there's a few things I want to speak to here. One being like, now as the adult, like you have to ask for what your needs are because people can't mind read. People don't know what you actually need. So like, nope, I have to advocate. I have to take action. I have to ask. But I want to name that that's a different part of you. There's a part of you that has learned to do that, but the part of you whose needs never were met still probably is scared shitless about having its needs met or asking for something,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Not having, yeah, it's not that it's scared, it's just really uncomfortable because the survival patterns were like, well, I'm here because I have relied on my survival patterns that were not inclusive of asking to be helped. And
Exactly.
asking for help can look very messy or can look completely, or it just doesn't happen actually. Do it yourself.
And the reason why I wanted to point that out is because this is like top down. This is like, I like to point out the difference top down, bottom up, right? Top down, I can be like, no, I have to learn how to ask for what I need. So I'm going to practice asking for what I need, even though it's messy, even though it's uncomfortable, I'm going to do it. So I'm making the conscious choice to ask for what I need, right? But the part of you that never had its needs met doesn't even know how to receive those and be held in those needs. So it's kind of like we're working with these underlying tones that never were met, right? And we want to learn how to like hold and be the empathic witness for the parts of us that never were met in the ways we expected to be met, right? And any grief that may be showing up around that, while also noticing these other brilliant survival patterns we've adapted to like try to make it be different. So I would name that because I find it so important to, yeah, practice these things that help us change the way we show up in the world, but we also have to go to the core pieces that are stuck in time, having never had the needs met in the first place in these very early developmental years, right?
Yeah.
And that's so, so important.
Yeah. Try to soothe a 45-year-old child, you know, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's the endeavor.
Yeah, exactly. So, Dede, I want to just for a moment ask you to speak a little to how, when you're in this quality of like, make everything the best that it can for everyone else, how do you notice yourself in that?
Well, I'm
How does,
at it. I'm like the hostess with the mostess. So that it is to cater to people's emotional needs or food needs or hostessing needs or yoga classes needs or retreat needs. I've become excellent at it. So it's a bit of an act at times where it's just like, you know, it's like an actress going to work. There's the part of the actress that is self and then the role that they have to play. And so it can feel like that at times.
are you aware of how your physiology changes in that? Like how you move through the room? Do you feel like yeah, I won't put any words to it. I'll let you describe it.
When I am meeting people's needs or
When you're in the hostesses with the mostess.
the hostess with the mostess, she is good, man. She, you know, it's a dance that has been danced for many decades and it feels really comfortable. So it's fluid, it's easy, it's you know, it is what it is until it's just like there's that crash where it's like this is not sustainable long term, you know, unless you're supported or asking for help or being able to voice that, you know, perhaps you are needing support. Yeah.
If I were to act out Dede as the hostess with the mostess, how would my body move through space? How would I look? How would my facial
Well,
expressions be?
I've seen it before. Yeah.
I sure have. But just to, again, I want to paint, and you can answer this or not, but I want to paint the picture for people because this, again, I want to really emphasize how we can bring more awareness to the human experience, right? So you know what it looks like, you know what it feels like, but to articulate that so that if someone were listening, they could have a picture of you moving through space as the hostess with the mostess.
Oh, it's very fluid, it's very gracious, it's very, curated and put together until the door closes, and then it's not, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, just because I'm sure a few people could probably relate to that.
yeah, like a kind of a fish,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's the contrast again of like what it looks like in this fluidity, right? And in this performance, really. And then when the door closes, how everything changes. Your body changes, your moods changes, your emotions change, the physical tone in your body and your muscles change, like everything changes. Again, these contrasts we make when we're moving in and out of these patterns we find ourselves in. Yeah.
And so the prairie to that would be like a pretty big shutdown,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
pretty
The
big
crash.
crash, laying horizontal, lots of blankets, lots of support, lots of warmth, lots of, and the need, like that if it's not met by other people, then it has to be met with some kind of like feeling of support somehow.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Dede.
Yeah. Thank you.
Karina, anything you want to share about everything being perfect? Or any other people pleaser quality?
Well, it's starting to reach a point I'm noticing at work that I'm just getting frustrated and angry all the time because I'm not good enough. Other people aren't good enough. Sort of what Dede was saying is like, I try really hard. I give everything. Why do other people not care or not give the same back? So yeah, it's really starting to come out in anger, which is frustrating.
Yeah. Are you still doing all the things that you feel like you should do
Oh
to
yeah.
have it? Yeah. So it's like you're still in the pattern of like making sure everything's perfect and making sure everyone's got what they need so that they're okay. But now there's the anger and the resentment and the real realization of how much you put out and you're not being met in return.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the funness of being over people pleasing. Anything else you want to name to that?
I have noticed a few times where when I can let myself just not care and just sort of pause and notice or like at least pause and sort of think, well, it's okay. I'm just serving coffee and food. Like, what does this really matter in the big scheme of things? That I'm okay and that I'm calm and I don't go into overwhelm. But it's
Ooh.
hard to get to that place.
Yeah,
Hard to
of
let
course.
go of the people pleasing.
But you're getting little glimpses.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it. Okay, so we're gonna go there a little bit more today. So hopefully there'll be even more insight into what can happen and also how do we support ourselves in these explorations around our people-pleasing patterns, right? Especially when we get to this place of overwhelm where it's just like enough is enough differently, and I'm feeling the anger, I'm feeling the frustration, and wait, what simple things can we do to create more space around these people-pleasing patterns? So I want to move into a little exploration, bring in some curiosity into like there's a few questions we'll weave in here, but first, just even thinking of your pattern of people pleasing, we can inquire into what is this pattern afraid would happen. So what, when you're in this pattern that you find yourself in, what is it afraid will happen if it's not there?
For me,
And we can
so
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say I'm so scared that people aren't gonna like me. That's the like,
Yeah.
I don't feel good enough. I'm scared they'll see me in that way and not like me.
Yeah. So there's another somatic experience to that, right? There's like, okay, if I keep everyone happy and I'm on and I'm doing all the things and although it's exhausting, I'm just like on, doing, always moving, always taken care of, right? If I'm not doing that, I'm then at the risk of not being liked. And are you open to just describing what that might feel like if you weren't liked?
What my brain is going to not knowing what I like or what I want, or
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I know that's not super related, but that's where my brain went.
No, I think that's important because I can relate to that. It's like back to the needs. It's like if we can meet everyone else's needs, then everyone's okay. But actually, what are my needs? I don't even know what my needs are,
Yeah.
right? So it
Yeah.
does make sense. It's like, oh, okay, first I'm afraid people aren't going to like me, but then also I don't even know who I am in this state and like what are my needs? So there's
Yeah.
almost like a loss of identity. Are people going to like me? What, yeah, who am I? Again, that piece, right? So the reason why I'm inviting us to inquire into this, and we can do it in a few different ways. I'm asking the question first of like, what this part of us that moves into people pleasing, what is it afraid will happen if it's not there? And by noticing that, we're then getting more insight into what's at the core of why we do what we do. So this is the trauma, this is the burdens we carry, the beliefs we are entangled in, right? The parts of us that have been exiled live within this place. So we have these brilliant patterns because we don't want to feel the things that are at the core of it. So for you, Karina, it's the state of like, well, I won't be liked, but also like the loss of identity. I don't even know who I am. How do I even meet myself? Right? And is there anything you want to add to how you experience yourself in that place of like not even knowing your needs? Does it feel discombobulating? Is it, do you feel, a
Yeah.
dizziness? I notice
Oh, go ahead.
you go.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I feel not here at all.
Yeah.
It's very discombobulating. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, by people pleasing, you get to avoid feeling this discombobulation, not all here. It's overwhelming. I want to dissociate, right? So I find this is so important to map out because then it makes sense that you do what you do, right? It makes sense that the pattern's there to support you to not feel the discombobulating kind of not all here in the fear of are people going to like me and what is this? Who is this even? Right? So there's an edge that you're hovering at right now where it's like it could be too much, but you're also like right in this place where you can just pause and be in this experience. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I want to, while you're kind of hanging out in that, just describe this as like I love finding these types of edges because it's at this edge where we're working more with what's happening within the physiology. It's finding this place where it's somewhat scary and too slightly intense, but not too intense that I fully float away or dissociate or disconnect or do whatever. There's many options what we might do. But we get to be in that level of discomfort enough where we actually move through it, right? Can you feel how that's happening right now? There's a little bit of
Even, yeah,
settling. Yeah.
just listening to you is making that happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I call this riding a wave, where we find the edge where there's a slight discomfort and we stay there. We're just hanging out in this experience that's uncomfortable. We're not trying to fix it. We're not trying to top down direct or make something happen. We're just in the vulnerability of the scary thing. And we're not all the way in the depths of the scary thing of like people aren't going to like you and who are you? But, we're peeling through, you're moving through a layer to land more in yourself and back into your sense of wholeness. So, can you feel how you're back with us a little bit more?
Totally.
And those listening or those of you that are here, can you feel how something happened in Karina? Anything you want to reflect?
I feel like she's looking at the camera a little bit more. like
Mhm.
feels more engaged in like seeing herself, maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to me, the muscle tone in her face looks softer. There's more of a flushness. The breathing has settled a little bit. We're talking about her again, so she might move back into a little bit of activation. And this is the joys for me because I can feel people's systems so easily. So it's like, oh, there she goes. She's moving back into some activation again. So we'll redirect somewhere else. But, this is what we're looking for. It's so subtle. And all we did was we just paused to be in the experience, right, of what's underneath the survival pattern, and just to give ourselves a tiny bit of space to be in that edge of discomfort. We move through it, and that's actually creating a change on the cellular level. And sometimes it can be hard to tell, but it might be, Karina, that you have more of a shift in how you feel towards yourself, or a recognition of how you are moving through the world in this pattern, or something just feels different. And this is why I love this work. It's like so subtle, but the impact can be quite profound. So anything you want to add, Karina, before we move into another piece here?
I'm
Okay.
good. Thanks for
Awesome.
letting me ride the wave.
No problem. So anyone else have any insight of like, what are you afraid would happen if you weren't people pleasing? This is one way we can approach this.
I would say super similar. Like, I don't know what my needs are or who I am, and therefore to not people please would be like left to figure that out. But on
Mm,
another angle, I do feel like I would rather like vaporize than be a burden to anyone.
yeah.
And so it's like to make sure everyone's happy and smooth sailing is like to remove any of my like needs, anything that would cause a ripple. Because like it's probably my greatest fear to be a night, like to be a burden or like annoying in some way. It's like I would rather not.
Yeah. It's like, nope, fizzle, thanks. So you could play with it similar to how I just invited Karina to explore, or with this question. But what I'm more drawn to with you, Dre, is like, okay, there's this unraveling pattern, right, that we spoke to. And at the end of it is this fizzle away, right? It's like that's the be all end all, like that's the ideal. Thank you very much. Let's just tiptoe out of here and pretend nothing happened. So something that can be fun to play with in this is like, well, what happens, what shows up for you at the idea, and you've already kind of expressed this, but we'll try it this way, at the idea of fizzling away a little bit less. So if you
Like,
did the pattern a little tiny bit less, what shows up?
I guess it's just letting people be in their own potential negative experiences and not feeling like I need to be involved, just
So that's what it would
letting it
look like,
hang.
kind of thing. That's what
Yeah.
it would look like. Okay, let's
Yeah.
try it this way. Can you imagine yourself fizzling out right now?
Yeah, I guess so. Probably just
Okay.
like disengage entirely.
Yeah. Okay,
Disassociate.
perfect. So if we almost think of like a dial where fizzle out, you could like totally turn into the wall behind you, or you could turn into the wall a little less. If you could fizzle out more or less, how do you notice that happening? Or like, where is there an edge in the level of how much you could not fizzle out or fade away?
Mm, like in my own reaction
Yeah.
or in the circumstances around it.
So see if you can play more with this. And this is where I'm going to get you to like leave all details aside for a sec.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'll work with details, sometimes I won't. But this is where I find it can be interesting when we just pay attention to the experience that we want to have.
Mhm.
We can learn just from that experience. So if you imagine yourself kind of turning invisible, or like, fizzling out, fading away, like being not seen,
Mhm.
can you access that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Now, how do you notice yourself accessing that? It's kind of like make yourself invisible so that the waters stay calm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit of like like when you're a kid and you hear something scary and you're just like, be as still as possible.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like, don't breathe.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Do not rock the boat.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah, become as like unnoticeable as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, I love it. So in its fullest form, you wouldn't be breathing, you wouldn't be moving. Ideally, no one sees you. You're quiet as a mouse. Okay. What shows up at the idea of being a tiny, tiny, tiny bit less quiet?
I guess the potential for it to not be received well,
Mm-hmm.
like to be, yeah, instead of just like letting it pass and trying to like ride it out, being like, oh, I'm like, well, don't add to it.
Don't add.
Let it fizzle out entirely.
Would you
And
say
move
there's
on.
fear? Is there fear?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
How do you notice the fear?
Mhm. Probably like checking in on how people seem to be perceiving me, like if they seem upset with me or if I'm, yeah, sometimes I think about like what expression might be on my face.
Mm-hmm.
Sweating,
Can you
obviously.
feel yourself doing that a little bit right now?
And like definitely like a little bit of the shoulders forward.
Yeah. I'm pushing you a little into it. Not on
Yeah.
purpose, but kind of on purpose.
No, but it is. It's like trying
Right?
to
So,
maintain an outward
uh-huh.
calmness, but also being like distracted by that.
Uh-huh. Totally. Yeah. So there's this brilliant survival pattern of keep it all calm, stay outwardly in this calmness, while the inside is freaking out. Yeah? Okay. So I want to see if you can follow the inside a little bit more. If you were to notice that kind of freaking out quality, if that were just in your awareness a teeny tiny bit more, how would you describe it? What shows up? What wants to happen? Well, we know what wants to happen is, no, calm the waters again, right? This is your edge. This is the edge you're playing with, is like a tiny bit less of this braking system that wants to keep the waters calm equals you having to feel this thing that's underneath. And it's really uncomfortable. So this is your edge, similar to Karina. This is your edge where you're like, oh shit, but I don't want to feel it. The brake is like, no, 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 keep the look calm, right? So this is like, let's just acknowledge that it makes sense that you want to keep the waters calm because the thing that you're feeling underneath feels too big to feel. Like it's too much, too scary. I don't want to go there, right? So instead, you've got this brilliant strategy of keeping the waters calm, staying small, don't move, barely breathe. So there's this conflict at play of something underneath has an experience that wants to be expressed, but it feels like too much, so we put the brake on it. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. It's just like the idea of being sometimes is like I would inconvenience somebody.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's better
So
to
this
just
is where, so from a top-down perspective, you could be like, but I want to be seen. I want to speak up. I want to, like we spoke to before, like I'm going to advocate, not saying you do that, but I'm just naming that for some people. You might be like, oh, I'm so sick of staying small. I want to stand up for what I think I need. And, but on the inside, something's like, no, if we do that, we're going to die. Thank you very much. Right? So I want to name this because I find it so important for us to see the layers at play. The people pleasing is helping you not feel the intensity of that fear and terror of potentially, I'm not going to put exact words to it because it's your experience, but like the riskiness of having to feel the vulnerability of what's underneath this braking system is too much. So there's a good reason that pattern is there. So one way I would explore it is like, first off, just acknowledge these dynamics exist, right? That there's the break and then there's this experience underneath. And then you could even see if you can move in between the two. Like, okay, here's the way I keep myself small. That's what this feels like. And then here's that thing underneath. And that's how this feels like. I call it shifting back and forth, where it's like I'm shifting into that pattern and then I'm shifting into this physiological response that's underneath it and all this energy. And even just by shifting back and forth, or even me talking about it, it might all of a sudden create a bit of space and it actually feels a little less scary, a little less intense. Is anything happening for you?
It almost feels like liberating in the way that it's like the scary what if. I'm like, oh, well, it's probably a lot easier.
Yeah.
Everyone's just living their lives, expressing themselves so freely. Like, maybe that would
And
be easier. It's
do you
like
feel
part
like
of me is like,
do you feel like that's that like really scared parts realizing that, or is that the mind realizing that? Because that's two different things.
mm, probably the mind, I guess.
I agree.
Or even thinking about when I have been like, it's okay to have an opinion and like it going well. I'm like, remember that feeling. Like,
Yeah.
but
And this is
yeah,
again, like it's like, no, all I remember is that it's not okay. So I just, for one more little exploration here, Dre, see if you can, this staying small, dampening quality, see if you can imagine it lifting just a little so that you feel some of that energy underneath. Does that feel possible in this moment? So
yeah, I would say so.
this is where it's interesting because often what we perceive underneath feels so big and scary that our system's like, nope, don't go anywhere near it. Because at the time when it happened, when we were, however young, it was intense. And we adapted these brilliant ways to survive to not ever feel the intensity again. So it's often perceived to be this really big, scary thing. The more we kind of play with these edges and kind of ease the break off and feel some of that intensity, to me, it does feel like you've ridden through a little bit of a wave and there's still some break ready to come back on, which is understandable because to me, it's like onion layers, right? But there's a little more, maybe even confusion or like, well, wait a minute, it's not as big and scary as I perceive it to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think that in the past, I have been like so much more like hyper vigilantly people pleasing, and that I'm starting to be like Karina said, it's coming out in like anger, and I'm like big
Yeah.
fan of anger, big
Yeah.
big angry guy, and so that I think is something that's like naturally been happening over the last little while for me, and where I'm like less uncomfortable all the time, but it's just a natural thing to revert into.
Yeah.
And so it's
Which
like, oh yeah, like I could dabble a bit, I guess. Not so bad.
I can be in that edge of discomfort and maybe survive this situation.
I still like people who have opinions that are negative.
Part of you does. Part of you does. Awesome. Thanks, Trey. So, and again, just to point out subtle differences, I started off, Trey, I talked about like the pattern and how it unfolds, right? And it's kind of like the getting a little more invisible, staying small, not moving is the end of the pattern. One way you could explore it is like look at the segments a bit more and see the process it takes. What we ended up shifting into is more like, okay, here's the break. What happens if you do it a little bit less? Right? So that's how we explored a little bit of that. And sometimes we have to be careful when we're trying to fix something, right? Like I could be, for example, I'm a little bit pushing you a little to try to do this when something inside is also like, no, 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 no. So there's a flavor of me trying to fix it or change it. Well, it's like, hell no, I'm not doing this different. If I do this different, the consequences are way too big. And that's where that question of like, well, what are you afraid what is going to happen if that braking system isn't there to help out? If it's not there, is there anything that comes to mind? Which is what we did with Karina, right? This question of like, if the pattern's not there, what would happen? You know, sometimes it's as deep as like ostracization or death or like abandonment or whatever it is. It's usually pretty big, the reason why these patterns are here. So
Yeah,
you're uncovering some of those
I would
layers.
say like for sure. Yeah, that like what you were using as examples, like especially like abandonment and like yeah, ostracization is just like, ooh,
Yeah.
no,
Why would you
thank
go
you.
anywhere near that? Yeah. So then it makes sense that there's some hesitancy to play within the realms of getting uncomfortable, and the preference is to just keep the waters calm, right? Like see the layers at play here. Yeah. I'm here to also avoid ostracization. I get it. Dede or Paula, anything you wanted to share around your patterns? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't do them? Anything else that's there with what we've been talking about?
If for me, I was thinking like what you say about people not liking you, like that doesn't seem like such a big deal to me because it feels so much bigger, and it is about that, about I think what I'm most, it feels that if I don't make like everyone else around me calm and happy, that like the world will end, and I'm very afraid of like their anger and their rage, and it feels like dangerous even. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, yeah, since we talked about that, about people not liking you, it's like that's actually fine. Like it's not nice when people don't like you, but that's not, it's not dangerous. And it just feels like yeah, I don't know, it feels like a life or death thing.
Yeah. So the extremeness, extremeness of the importance of the pattern is like, if I don't do it, the world will end. Yeah. So it really shows you how important your system perceives the pattern to be, right? And
Yeah.
and I want to kind of put a different spin on this, and this is for all of us to consider with our patterns. How do you feel towards this pattern of yours, Paula, that is like feels like it has to make sure everyone is happy or the world will end? How do you feel towards the fact that you do that? So we can all kind of ask ourselves, how do you feel towards your pattern?
I mean, from a rational point of view, I feel it's like I've never, it's not that I felt that my needs were neglected. I've, until very recently, I've never realized that I had any needs. And it's the same. I was very easygoing and chill, and like I'm really low maintenance, and I'm not. I have opinions, but I like to this day I struggle to know what my opinions and my tastes and my needs are. So it's, yeah, I don't know. It's, I don't feel that I have, yeah, I don't feel like I have like any needs, or that's, but from a rational point of view, I know that I do.
Mm-hmm.
From a physical point of view, I think it's really different. I don't know. I can't even. I feel like I like the pattern has to be there for like the world to run. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No, I
Yeah.
think that's an important thing to observe. There's almost like it's not a justification, but like an acceptance, maybe, of like, well, it has to be this way or the world wouldn't survive. It's like a way you've learned to navigate it is just accept it, because without it, the world would fall apart. Does that make sense? So how you
Yeah.
feel towards it is you don't necessarily, so for some people, how you feel towards your patterns, right? Like Dre and Karina are like, well, I'm pissed off, I'm annoyed, I'm angry, I'm resentful, right? I'm really challenged by my patterns. Dede, anything you want to add towards how you feel towards, how you feel towards your pattern?
Um, I suppose I can relate to everybody a little bit as well. Like, um, you know, the patterns that I have towards people pleasing specifically are so deeply ingrained that like I don't know what it would be without it.
Mhm.
So that's a curious inquiry. Um, and sometimes I feel annoyed with myself for not being able to have have strong boundaries. Like I can think of a specific friend here in Tofino, like they have really strong boundaries for themselves. And sometimes I see this, I think we had that conversation last time in your workshop, or no, it wasn't the teacher training, pardon me. I see this almost as selfish and not arrogant, but damn selfish of them to have such strong boundaries. And I don't know how it'd feel to have such defined needs. Yeah, I don't know, because it's just been like, yeah. I'm exercising. I hear myself say a lot in my current, in my most close relationship, which is my marriage. I now hear myself say, I'll follow your lead. So that's a way that I've given myself the permission to not take like some kind of lead or control of a situation in a people-pleasing way, in giving myself the permission to say, I'll follow your lead. So that is huge for me. And it sounds perhaps little, but it's huge for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to just catch something here, right? What I'm hearing is that you're finding ways to, you're aware of the pattern of wanting to make sure everyone's happy and everything's taken care of and be in the lead, and you're finding other ways to show up in the world. It's like Dre said too, right? It's like, oh, I could play with these edges of people not being happy, and can I just notice that maybe it's uncomfortable, right? Or I can, anything else you want to add to that, Dre, around like how you're playing with the other possibility of doing it different?
Yeah, like the boundaries being selfish is something I definitely feel and see, and I'm like now more logically aware of that. And then it's the kind of thing where as I try it out more, I'm like, oh, like boundaries are hard, but also really not hard. It's like one of those funny things that you're just like practicing that, or like, yeah, like trying not to people please and being like, what would that be like? And you're like, terrifying, but also kind of thrilling.
Yeah. Yeah. So finding these different ways to experiment where it's not as familiar or not as comfortable, but there's capacity to try it on for size, right? And what's really standing out to me and what everyone's sharing is it's like, well, I don't have needs, or I don't know what my needs are. So another way to experiment with that is like, well, how could I notice these people that are like, whoa, you have needs? How demanding of you, and how, cocky of you or arrogant of you. And it's like, oh, but can I pause and see that as a model of what it might look like to have a need? I've entangled the fact that a need equals you're selfish, you're greedy, you have too strong boundaries. So it's kind of like see the other end of the spectrum and see how you can notice that and how that looks like in them, and then how it looks like in you. The discomfort it is in you, but how comfortable they are in it, and how that can also be a really cool opportunity to learn, like, oh, I'm being modeled something, because chances are you weren't modeled having your own needs or being important when you were a kid. It's like your needs didn't matter. You didn't know what your yeses and your nos were, because your yeses and nos quickly got shut down because someone else's yeses and nos was more important than yours. Mhm. So, it's so hard because I want to like talk for hours about this and like dive deeper into Paula's and Dede's experience as well. Paula, something that I want to kind of just come back to is, again, how we feel towards our survival patterns. For some people, it can be anger, frustration, annoyance. Other people, it can be just this sense of like, whatever, this is how it has to be, and I can't imagine it any way else. Or like Karina and Dede said, of like, well, who am I if I'm not this, right? What I want to invite us to do right now is to like pan out and see the many layers at play. So far we've talked about the survival pattern. We've talked about what's potentially at the core of it, right? For Paula, it's like, well, if I don't do this, the whole world's gonna end. For Dre, there's this like riskiness of, we didn't fully hear it, but there's the riskiness of having a need and the consequence of that, ostracization, all of that kind of being there. For Karina, same thing, not being liked, or like, who am I if I'm not that? Dede, you also mentioned, who am I if I'm not these patterns? There might be something else also. Like, if you're not making sure everyone else is okay and everything is perfect and everything is taken care of and taking the lead on everything, right? If you were to do that a little less, you're going to find the discomfort that lies in there, which is why the patterns are there in the first place. So we've mainly talked about those layers, right? The pattern and what's at the core of it, the discomfort we're avoiding feeling. If we pan out a little bit more, we notice how we feel towards it. So that's where there's anger, frustration, annoyance, wanting things to be different. Not so much with Paula, right? It's more like, well, I have to just be this. But that's still this belief that's entangled in these inner layers, right? So what I want to invite us to do to finish up is like pan out even more. So it's as if we're drawing a map or seeing the map of all our layers at play. We see at the core is our trauma, the burdens, the beliefs. And then we have these patterns that we've adapted. Then we have how we feel towards it. And it makes sense that there's anger there, frustration, resentment. Makes sense that people might be trying to find the answers, trying out all these different techniques to not be people pleasers anymore, right? But how do we plan out and acknowledge all these different layers that exist here? Anything happen for any of you with this idea of kind of like panning out, creating more space to just like get a bird's eye view on the many layers that are at play? Maybe Paula or Dede, anything that shows up for you at the invitation that I'm proposing to you around that? I'll just go there first, then if anyone else has anything to share.
For me, I was, because all the people pleasing in the end is like what we've talked about, worrying about other people instead of myself. But then as we were talking, I realized that it's actually really, really self-centered, because it's just, it's in the end about my patterns and how I make people feel and so on. So when you talk about panning out, it feels like it's a lot less about me, and then I feel a lot less burden on my shoulders. It felt kind of liberating to look out like a little bit further, instead of, I just realized when I get stuck in my people pleasing, it's my world becomes so small. So panning out really, really helps.
Amazing. So you're able to reconnect with yourself and not be entangled just in this very intense and important pattern that's so convinced that if you didn't do it, the world is going to just fall apart and end, right? But by panning out, it's like, oh, wait, another reality does exist. I am whole. I am here. I do matter. I might even have needs the more I am connected to this, right?
Yeah, and there's a whole world out there. Like everyone, we can all take care of the world. It doesn't have to be me. So I'm getting chills. It's like, it's really, yeah, it's that it's there's more than me in the world, so I'm not responsible for everything. It just feels really,
yeah, beautiful. It sounds like, feels like to me that like it's like you're plugging back into the collective experience instead of being lost in the individualistic pattern of, oh my gosh, it's my responsibility to make sure that the world is happy. So huge. And this is where I think with all of us seeking and trying to find the answers of, how do we become better people or heal or whatever our mission is here, it doesn't have to be so complicated, right? And the more we can pan out and kind of see the layers at play, we can hold it from a place where we're collectively supported and where we can really hold the layers with a little more grace and a little more empathy instead of this conflict and challenge that we're constantly putting ourselves into, right? And how easy it can be. Like all you did, Paula, is pan out, and then you were remembered like, oh, part of this collective experience. And wait, it's not just me here. And yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Dede, anything for you?
Remind me the question. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, no,
When
no,
I
no.
egg. My
So
sense,
to kind of see it as layers, right?
yeah.
So at the core, we didn't fully get there, but at the core is like, okay, if you weren't the lead and taking care of everyone and everything and had all the details in place, um, you would have to experience this depth, the trauma, right? So then you have your mad skills that you have to take care of everyone else, and then you have how you feel towards it. So you might be tired of it, you might be frustrated, you might be like, trying these different things out, right? Letting your partner lead the way a little bit more and playing in the edges of that. And then if you pan out even more, like getting a bird's eye view on the many layers that are at play here, is there anything you experience by panning out? And for some of you, when I say this, you'll be like, what are you talking about, Nicole? I don't know, panning out. And others, it'll be like, click, something
Mhm.
else is experienced. So it's not a big deal if you don't experience something there.
I'm not sure anything's coming out specifically, but what I can notice or witness is that if I were not to be in these patterns, the amount of guilt that would be present.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is a little bit difficult right now for me to visualize or feel or sense,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly the word guilt rather was coming up a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
I appreciate you naming that because often we have to see more of the inner layers and
mm,
acknowledge them before we're able to pan out. So if anyone's having a hard time panning out, it's usually because there's still some inner layers that are in conflict or haven't quite been seen yet. So even just by acknowledging that there's guilt there, right? And there's this experience that really comes with the guilt. And it also makes sense that there's guilt there. That's probably one of the main reasons why you do this, people pleasing in
mhm.
many different forms. So even just by acknowledging the guilt, does something change?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be so big or
Mm-hmm.
have to, feeling guilty is guilty of resting, guilty of, you know, not doing the dishes, guilty of not cooking dinner, guilty of not walking the dog is cumulative and it's exhaustive.
Mm-hmm. And this is where, again, you get to pay attention.
Mm,
Do you know you don't need to feel guilty? More of a like rational mind trying to tell yourself you don't need to feel guilty. I'm pointing this out because some people
mm,
might see that versus like, like there's a shift in your relationship to not having to feel guilty because you have an embodied knowing that the guilt can be there less. That's different than my mind telling me I don't have
mm,
to be guilty. I just
mm,
really find that's important to point out, right?
mm,
We've pointed it out a few different times, these differences of more like I'm telling myself not to experience something or to experience something versus I actually feel it.
mhm. Yeah, there's a huge disconnect for sure.
It's more the
Yeah.
mind telling you to not be guilty.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the guilt still exists, but the
Oh yeah.
mind is trying to tell the guilt not
It's
to.
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are still the inner circles in the workings, right?
Yeah.
When we pan out and we're able to experience that panned out experience, and again, it takes some practice and takes some exploration, but when we pan out, the guilt shifts,
Mm,
or we have a different relationship with the guilt. It makes more sense that it's there, and then it starts to shift and soften. So I'm planting that as a seed
mm.
for further explorations
Yeah,
in the
thank you.
future. No
Mm.
problem. Karina, Dre, I'm mindful of time, so anything you want to add about panning out, and then we'll wrap up.
I felt similar to Paula. It right away was a like calmness. I am whole. I'm part of the world. And I think that I lose sight of that, forget that, and
Wow.
focus inward too much.
And it's such a like Again, there'll be many people who don't experience this. So if you have no idea what Paula and Karina are speaking to, no, you're not alone. And it does take some practice and some pausing and noticing these other layers. And both of them have done Discover, one of my programs, right? And um, Paula's worked with me personally. So they're more immersed in this work. But what I want to name is like the more we discover that we're already whole, the easier it becomes to pause and notice us in the pattern, to know what's at the core of it, and to dive deeper into unraveling more of where we're stuck in the threat response cycle. It allows us to also see how we feel towards our patterning and the many dynamics that are at play there and how we are often in conflict with ourselves. But we're able to do it with way more space and way more grace for just being human and having all these different patterns and having all these different ways of moving through the world. And this is the ongoing practice. We're already whole. Pause and notice, bring more awareness to the picture, bring more curiosity into what else is possible, recognize that there's nothing to fix. We're already whole, right? It's this ongoing and like a practice every day. Like it becomes a way of life. It's not just these steps we do every now and then. So naming that. Trey, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think when I panned out, there was part of me that was like, life's messy and that's okay. Like the acceptance of it being uncomfortable, like even if it's, you know, still gonna like linger, that it's like self-doubt or whatever, like there's still this element of being okay with messiness, being like brave about having uncomfortable feelings and other people knowing it.
I like it. I like it. So it gets to be the practice, right? So when we notice we're people pleasing, we can pause and notice we're people pleasing. Does it make sense that, of course, we're people pleasing, right? I'm trying to avoid feeling something here, right? It's helping out. How can I pan out in that moment to play with the edges because I've created more space for my experience? Yeah, cool. Like, you and Dede need to go to a restaurant together. Awesome. Anything else any of you want to add before we sign off? Maybe I will, if you have a takeaway, what's your aha or a takeaway that you're going to kind of leave with or play with after today? And anything else you want to throw in there, go for it. And then
I'd like to say I needed that reminder of like I always think about pausing and noticing, but when I'm really busy and in work and in, you know, in that, I find that really difficult, but it feels way more doable. Just the reminder of stepping back and looking at it, the bigger picture.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Karina.
That was nice. Thank you.
Good. Simple practice, although sometimes complex, but also really powerful. Yeah. Anything else to add?
For me, I tell people that I'm a recovered or recovering people pleaser, that I feel like I always feel like I'm 80-90% of the way there. I feel like I've made so much progress. But then going and digging back into these patterns, I realize it just makes me aware of how much they still run my life. So there's always more work to do. There's always more layers to peel.
Yeah. Never ending. But it gets easier? No.
Oh yeah.
It can happen with more ease. It doesn't necessarily become easier.
And I feel as well that I have more grace for myself because I know that that there will be progress, that I can move through them, so that it feels like there's an end. That's how it
Yeah.
feels now versus before.
Beautiful. Thanks, Paula. Anything else before we end? All right. Thank you so much for the four of you for being here and being willing to explore and share your experiences. Hopefully you learned, you and everyone listening, I'm sure, can relate to what you experienced. And hopefully we all learned something from this. So thank you for being willing to be here. And to support all of us in our learning. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that this episode has provided you with new perspectives and insights. And if you haven't already, head to my website to download the experiential guide. Until the next time, I invite you to continue to pause and notice.